Welcome to the Maker's Table. Let's take a break from the mundane and step into something a little deeper. Pull up a chair. We're going to make something intentional together. Still Waters did not begin as a blend for me. Actually, when I first made Wild Heart, I had created that blend for myself. Wild Heart was deeply personal. It came from my own need to return to self-love, boldness, and courage for the parts of myself that still wanted to live unapologetically. I loved the process so much, and the smell was amazing that my mother and brother both asked me to create blends for them too. My brother is particular about scents though. He knew exactly what he did not want, and he was very clear about what he did. He specifically requested something that was crisp, fresh, bright, and clean. He wanted something uplifting without being overly sweet or too heavy. At the time, he wore this heavy, authentic malachite necklace almost constantly. I don't see him wear it as much anymore, but back then, it became part of the image I held of him while I was creating this. I remember thinking about the energy I felt from the malachite he wore. It was something grounding, something deeply protective, something ancient and deeply rooted, something beautiful, but also something that carried weight. Malachite has this visual movement to it. These dark and light green patterns seem to move across the stone like layers of earth and water and memory. While I was thinking about my brother, I knew I wanted to create something that felt lighter and more uplifting than the stones itself, but also not shallow. Something fresh enough to lift the spirit, but grounded enough to hold it. Something that could remind him that even in chaos, turmoil, or emotional heaviness, stillness could help him return to himself. That was the beginning of Still Waters. At first, the blend was only lemongrass, patchouli, and white sage. And honestly, it was still just a little too bright, too citrusy, and almost a little fruity. It had lift, but it did not yet have balance. It wanted to rise, but it didn't know how to settle. I kept returning to the blend, trying to understand why it was not giving me the grounded, soothing feeling I wanted. The ingredients were technically beautiful together. The freshness was there, the clarity was there, the cleansing quality was beautifully woven in, but the blend still felt incomplete to me. It felt as though it was trying to escape its own weight instead of learning how to carry it. And sometimes, truthfully, we do that as well. Sometimes we try to rise before we have found our footing. We tell ourselves to look on the bright side, while grief, anger, fear, or exhaustion are still sitting quietly in the body, asking to be acknowledged. We try to lift ourselves out of an emotion before we have listened to what it came to tell us, and honestly, that's what the first version of Still Waters felt like to me. So then, I added some mint and eucalyptus, and slowly, the blend began to round itself out. The sharpness softened, the brightness opened into breath. The freshness became less about escape and more about clarity. It finally began to feel like what I had been trying to create all along. It felt like a way through heavy, chaotic, or stagnant energy into stillness, true stillness, not avoidance, not numbness, but actual stillness. Who knew later I would need that same reminder for myself? This month, grief and uncertainty have been present in my return, but also so is the temptation to keep moving simply because stillness might allow me to feel what I've been trying to outwork. There are moments when producing can become a hiding place and when productivity becomes a way to outrun the pain body. Sometimes constant movement can create just enough noise to keep us from hearing what is happening beneath the surface. Sometimes the most honest movement is the one inward. Sometimes healing asks us to stop long enough to notice what we have been carrying. And sometimes the strongest thing that we can do is become still enough to hear what we actually needed. Honestly, this morning, before I started working on this very script, I had to practice that lesson. My morning started a little emotional. I was not ready to move straight into production, but I considered pushing myself through, and the old version of me would have forced it. She would have tried to punish turmoil into productivity. Instead, I meditated. I made a comforting still waters tea blend. I ate. I showered. I gave myself time to emotionally arrive before asking myself to create. This morning, I honored myself instead of forcing production through turmoil. And that's the essence of still waters. What does it mean to find peace without pretending nothing disturbed you? I think still waters lives somewhere inside of that question. Still water has reminded me that rest is not surrender. Pausing is not giving up. And becoming still is as much of the process of grief as motion is. I can't remain still, but also I shouldn't remain in motion, afraid to feel what waits for me on the other side of that. I realize still water is not silence forced over grief, anger, or even confusion. And it's not necessarily the absence of movement. Still water is the balm that does not deny the wound, but gives the body enough quiet to begin imagining what may still be possible. It's the space where the emotions can exist without controlling every next step. Stillness does not simply erase the storms. It allows us to see what remains once the water is no longer being constantly disturbed. Still waters opens with lemongrass as the first lift out of stagnancy. It is bright, sharp, and alive, and it cuts through mental fog, offering a little oasis of clarity. It moves through heaviness like entering a closed room, but on its own, it can become too eager to rise and too quick to escape the ground. Brightness without grounding can sometimes become another form of avoidance. We can reach so quickly for happiness, for hope, or optimism that we forget to create the foundation strong enough to actually hold them. So I added patchouli. Patchouli gives the blend its earth. It offers depth, weight, grounding, and a place for all that brightness to land. It slows the blend down. It reminds the offering that peace needs somewhere to live. Stillness cannot exist only inside the mind. It must be able to settle into the body, into the breath, into the room, and into the ground beneath us. Even the highest vision needs roots. Even inspiration needs structure. And even healing needs somewhere safe to land. If we only fly too close to the sun like Icarus, without respecting our limits or remembering the ground beneath us, our waxed together wings will melt and the fall can become shattering. We cannot neglect the need to safely ground ourselves or our energy simply because the rising feels more beautiful. Sometimes returning to the earth is the most sacred form of protection. Mint brings movement back into places that have grown stagnant. It is a cooling balm that awakens and enlivens the feeling of taking the first full breath after being emotionally devastated. It feels like the moment when something inside the body realizes there may still be space to expand. Mint invites. It says, you can breathe here. You can move again when you're ready. You're not required to remain frozen simply because you needed stillness to heal. Eucalyptus opens the chest of the blend, giving space where there was constriction and helping circulate energy with its freshness, becoming something soothing rather than sharp. To me, eucalyptus carries the feeling of the lungs opening after the body has been holding itself tightly. Breath is such a quiet form of return. We breathe without thinking about it most of the time, but breath can be an important tool of return, an important reminder that you're still here, that your body is still carrying you, and that this moment is just that, a moment, not every moment. Still water in its entirety requires patience with yourself. Still water reminds me that healing is not one size fits all. Sometimes it demands motion, and sometimes it demands stillness. The wisdom is in learning which one the moment is asking for. When I originally created still waters, for my brother, I never realized the lesson was not his alone. And maybe it's not even mine alone. I know for me personally, I have needed this blend in a season when my thoughts were too loud, when grief sat heavily in this room, when urgency convinced me I had to keep producing, and when stillness felt dangerous because I knew what might rise if I stopped moving. Stillness is part of grief. Rest is part of the rebuilding, and pause is part of the discernment. Sometimes the clearest next step does not appear until the water settles. And sometimes the strongest thing we can do is become still enough to hear what it is actually needing. And sometimes the strongest thing we can do is become still enough to hear what it is we actually need. Still water is not a correction. It's a companion. Something sitting beside you when life feels heavy, chaotic, stagnant, or emotionally crowded. Something that says you do not have to make every decision while the water is still churning. When still water is finally lit, I hope it creates a space where your spirit can settle without disappearing. I hope it soothes when life feels louder than your own voice. I hope it helps you remember that peace does not require forgetting. Sometimes the water just needs time to settle and reflect without another stone being thrown into it. Perhaps, once we can see, we can choose what comes next from a steadier place. This is the true still water. Not just lemongrass, not just patchouli, not just white sage, mint, and eucalyptus. It is the story of learning that uplift needs grounding, clarity needs breath, healing demands both movement and stillness. And that peace is not pretending nothing disturbed you, but learning how to return to yourself after it did. Thank you for sitting with me at the maker's table. Here we make slowly, we mend honestly, and we honor the sacredness of what is still becoming. If you would like to return to the table, subscribe and meet me here for the next story. Until then, may you find enough stillness to hear yourself again, and may the waters settle just enough for possibility to return.
And when I'm back in Chicago,